My man, James from Mint Hunter Comics recently got what I consider to be screwed out of thousands of dollars from a comic deal gone bad. And of course, hindsight is 2020, but I thought I would talk about what I think he could have done differently, because I think the lessons we can learn can be applied to all kinds of areas of our lives to help protect us from being taken advantage of. So what the heck happened? Well, recently someone came into the antique shop where he sells comics with a collection of books that he had gotten from his uncle. And he tells James, hey, this collection is pretty much just a nuisance to me. And remember that as I tell this story, the seller said this collection is a nuisance. And he said, my daughter doesn't really want them, and so I'm hoping that you can give me like $200 for them. And so James said, sure, I'll take a look. And so he begins to pick through the collection. He realizes, oh man, there are some really valuable books here, like an Incredible Hulk 181. And he starts to think, I think there's probably like $35,000 worth of books in this collection. And because James is such a good guy, he says to himself, well, there's no way that I can only pay $200 for a $35,000 collection. I mean, what a stand-up guy, right? But because he's such a nice guy, and I say this because I have, at least in most of my life, tried to be a nice guy, but unfortunately, that leads us to being, in my opinion, a little naive. And I'm not trying to say that directly about James, because, again, I'm mostly just projecting my own anger at myself being naive in a lot of situations like this. We just try to be so nice that we put ourselves in a losing position. And unfortunately, as the old saying goes, no good deed goes unpunished. And often nice guys, unfortunately, finish last. And so James then makes what I think is a huge mistake. And please listen to my whole spiel before you make any judgments on me and think I'm some kind of jerk. But he makes a huge mistake, in my opinion, where up front he puts all of his cards on the table and tells this guy, hey, I think this collection is actually worth thousands of dollars, and I can't just give you $200 for it. Now, if this guy was also a nice guy, and again, this is easy to say, when you're in the moment, you're not always making rational decisions, but if this guy was a nice guy like James, how he would have responded would have been like, oh my goodness, I had no idea. Thank you so much. I was just hoping to get a couple $100, but if you think you should pay me more, just pay me whatever you think is fair. And then James could have looked it over, maybe given him, I don't know how he'd have priced it. Let's say 25%, give him like $8,000 for the collection, and the guy would have left ecstatic that he got $8,000 when he was only expecting to get $200. But unfortunately, this guy, at least in the heat of the moment, I obviously don't know this guy, but in the heat of the moment, he was not a nice guy. And all of a sudden, the dollar sign started flashing before his eyes. And he's like, $35,000? Well, sorry, James, I'm out of here. And unfortunately, James then lost out on this collection and thousands of dollars of potential profit. Now, what do I think that he could have done differently while still maintaining his integrity? Well, James is a young guy. I'm not so young anymore. And so, again, I've gotten in trouble being taken advantage of. And so this is why my heart just breaks this story, because, again, I just see myself in it. But knowledge is obviously power. Now, James, as a man of integrity, realizes, hey, I can't just give $200 for this collection. It's not fair. But, again, hindsight's 2020. Maybe he could have thought to himself, but if I say too much, this guy's going to run off. And so what I think he could have done, and it's still been ethical, is go ahead and make the deal. Give the guy $200, take possession and ownership of the collection, and then he could say something like, hey, I'm obviously going to resell these books, and there's a chance, and however he said it, more than a chance, that I am going to make more than I should, considering I only paid $200 for this. If you leave me your phone number or your email or whatever it is, once I make more money, I'll send you what I think is fair. And then as James began to sell the collection over the next weeks or months, he could send this guy $500 here, $1,000 there. And man, I think that dude would have been so ecstatic. I mean, you go and you sell a collection for $200, and all of a sudden, weeks later, you get another check for $500. A few weeks after that, a check for $1,000. I mean, the guy should have been on cloud 9 with that, right? Now, another thing he could have done, instead, he could have taken ownership of the collection and then say, oh, I'm looking over these books more and I'm realizing, oh, there's some really big books here. Let me go ahead and cut you a check for $8,000 extra. And I don't think that's as good of a deal for James, because I do think, like, if all of a sudden you're like, yeah, buy for $200, here's an extra $8,000, like, it would have been such an abrupt deal or extra payment that the guy would have started like, oh my goodness, I must have just sold a gold mine, and then start regret and get angry at James even. Whereas if you spread those bonus payments over a few weeks, I think it's just like a bonus check every few weeks, and the guy is a lot more excited about it. And what might actually be even the biggest shame of this whole scenario is that James, in trying to do the right thing and make this guy happy, I think actually has probably set this guy up for more misery. Because this guy, again, all of a sudden he's got dollar signs in his eyes and he's thinking, wow, I'm going to get $35,000 for these books. And he's obviously never sold comics before. And so what I think is likely, he's going to try to put it on Facebook or somewhere else, and no one is going to pay full value for that collection. Maybe he says, well, I'm going to start trying to learn how to sell on eBay and piece it out. Seems unlikely, but still, that's a lot of hassle, especially for someone who doesn't really know anything about the hobby. So I think he's going to try to sell it and just get really frustrated and think, oh, everybody's out to get me. I should be getting $35,000, and instead they're only offering me $8,000. And eventually, he'll probably settle with someone for that $8,000 that James would have given him. And maybe, in fact, this has somewhat of a happy ending. He goes back to James and said, hey, you know what? I tried to sell this. I realize I don't know what I'm doing. What can you give me? And James says $8,000, and they do the deal. But even if that happens, I feel that guy still will be a little more disgruntled. He'll know in his mind that, wow, I could have made $35,000 here. This guy James is only giving me $8,000. I know he helped me, but he kind of is screwing me over too. And regardless, even if he feels good at that point, he still would have gone through probably months of being miserable trying to get this collection sold. And yeah, it's just too bad. And I don't know this guy. Obviously, I have no idea. I'm just assuming. I'm just thinking. I've dealt with people like this before. And once the dollar signs get in the eyes, then they stop thinking rationally. And I just think he's going to end up being unsatisfied. Whereas if he just got that $200 and never heard anything else about this collection, he would have been ecstatic. Walked out, told his daughter, well, I got $200 for this collection. Now, to his defense, James shared another reason why he was so upfront about the value of this collection is because he was worried about ruining the reputation of his business. In other words, he was concerned that he'd pay this guy $200. This guy would go back and find out, oh, shoot, that collection was worth $35,000. And then he would start releasing scathing reviews on this antique shop. These guys will rip you off. And so James was concerned that, hey, I'm going to lose potentially tens of thousands of dollars in business in order to do this short-term deal where I make thousands of dollars. But personally, I think the risk of that is pretty low. I mean, I feel if this guy hadn't researched the value of a Incredible Hulk 181 before selling it, he's not going to go back home and research that value afterwards. And perhaps James was concerned, well, I'm going to make a YouTube video on this collection, and then I'll get exposed that way. But I don't think we have to reveal everything about every transaction we make, even if you're a YouTuber. I mean, obviously it makes for a great story. Hopefully James got tons of views on that video. Obviously, I think it's such a great story. I'm making my own video of it. And you don't have to share everything. And this is part of the information is so valuable, especially in this hobby. Information is worth a lot. I mean, in that scenario, because James had so much information, it potentially could have earned him thousands of dollars compared to this other guy who didn't have much information. And so a lot of people feel sympathy, I think, for that guy and say, well, yeah, it's not his fault that he doesn't know as much as James. But, you know, I personally see it kind of differently. Here, this is interesting, I think. So I think, you know, reading his comics was interesting on the video. But I'm curious, do you think he was obligated to mention how much those comics were worth at all? Would it have been okay for him just to pay that $200 and call it a day? And personally, I see why people wouldn't feel comfortable with that, but I don't think James was obligated to say anything. Because the guy came in with his price. It'd be different if the guy said, hey, how much are these worth? What do you think? And James deceived him and said, they're worth like $500. I'll give you a couple $100. But this guy came in saying, all I want is $200 for them. I think it's okay. And I saw some people in the comments, and I feel this way too. Like if you know, you went to a flea market and someone had that box of books marked for $200, would you feel bad? Or if that Hulk was priced for $25, would you feel bad? No, you'd be excited. You'd be like, wow, I found this at the flea market. Because you understand that guy is a businessman and he should know better. Well, you know, how much responsibility does the seller have to educate himself? Obviously, he's not going to know as much as those of us who are in the hobby are going to know. But there's just so much information that's easily and readily available on the internet that I think this guy going in only wanting $200 is somewhat on him. And this is where it's hard. So somebody in this situation is going up with $35,000 worth of comics. Who deserves that? Does James, who's obviously an honest businessman who loves this hobby, deserve those books? Or does this guy who got these books from his uncle and described them as a nuisance? I would never, even if I felt deep down in my heart, you know, oh man, I got these things I don't want, I would never tell someone else that a family member gave me something and it's just a nuisance. So instead of being grateful, and again, I obviously don't know this guy. Maybe he's the best guy in the world and he just had an off day. Who knows, right? But this guy who describes this as a nuisance and doesn't want to put in any work to determine their value of again, books that were given to him by a family member. I mean, he shows no care for that. Does he deserve those comics? I mean, for my money, I'd rather see James with it. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think? Now, perhaps I've got this story all wrong, and James is actually playing 4D chess the whole time. In other words, maybe in the heat of the moment, he thought to himself, hey, if I give up this deal, I'm going to lose thousands of dollars of profit. But I'm going to have this story that will build my reputation as a good, honest businessman, that will bring in tens of thousands of dollars of business, that will dwarf the thousands of dollars that I'm losing here. I mean, perhaps James is just a marketing genius, or perhaps his story isn't true at all. And we always have to be careful what it is that we believe here on the interwebs. I'm fascinated by watching YouTube channels on scams and catfishing and things like that. So maybe James is just catfishing us all, and this is just a complete hoax to make us believe that he's a good guy. Now, I don't think that's true. I do get the feeling that he's very sincere in his videos. But people, if you watch catfish videos, people have believed a lot of things by what's communicated on the internet. So we always got to keep that in mind. Maybe this is 4D chess going on. And I'll conclude by saying no matter what he could have done differently, I do think that ultimately James did the better of the two options that he was considering, either just doing the deal outright or not doing it, because of his personal convictions. And no amount of money is worth betraying your personal convictions. The guilt, the shame, the loss of self-respect that comes from your own self-sabotage is not worth it. So kudos to him for sticking by his guns. And hopefully, if he sees this video or fans of his see this video, you know that I'm on your side. Yeah, that I think he's a great guy, unless he is indeed catfishing us. Just think we all can learn. And again, this is just me speaking to someone who's been taken advantage of, often for giving too much information. And again, with this information, it's one of the things with selling and buying, especially comics. I mean, I've put more work in this hobby perhaps than I did in college, right? There should be some level of reward for it. And obviously in this situation, we are talking about potentially an incredible amount of reward that is probably outweighs the information and the study that James has done in this hobby. But again, I think there is a way where he could have done the deal while still maintaining his ethics and his personal convictions. But you tell me, what do you think? Am I being naive? Did James do the right thing? Did he do the wrong thing? If you haven't subscribed to this channel, please consider doing so. Like, subscribe. Thank you.